Good evening, everybody. Happy to see you all again, and after a while, it feels like a family meeting every Tuesday evening. It's almost our last session. I'm very much happy to welcome Tatjana Pavlov-West, who is a lecturer from Freie Hochschule Stuttgart. She has a study background from Berlin and London in English literature, English languages, and has been a long time teaching also in South Africa at Pretoria University, where she also holds a PhD in English literature. And she has also a Waldorf teacher training from Freie Hochschule Mannheim. And yes, her background also with her relationship to South Africa, it's the question which is quite urgent for us in our time, the question, how diverse is Waldorf? Thank you for being with us, Tatjana, and please start your presentation.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Jost, for this kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me, to giving me the possibility to hold a presentation on how diverse is Waldorf. I'm very happy to speak to such a diverse audience. And I'm also very curious actually to hear about your personal experiences with diversity in your diverse institutions across the world. And I'm sure we will have enough time at the end of my talk to exchange our experiences. I'm very much looking forward to it. But now I would like to begin my presentation with a very brief exercise. And I would like you all to close your eyes for a moment. And now imagine that you're walking along one of the major streets in your town. And I would like you to look at the people around you. How do they look like? What do they do? How do they interact? And what languages do you hear them speaking? Well, when I walk along the Königstraße here in Stuttgart, one of the main shopping streets, well, I see all kinds of people. I see very poor people collecting bottles or trying to find some food in rubbish bins or asking for money. But I also see very rich people wearing expensive clothes and carrying bags with Gucci or Boss labels. I see young people and I see old people. Sometimes I see people in wheelchairs, and sometimes I see people walking around with walking sticks or walkers. I see heterosexual and homosexual couples holding hands and kissing and looking happy. And I see people with different skin colors speaking German and sometimes other languages. And I'm always very happy when I can understand the languages they speak. What was your experience? Did you actually have the same perception, or was it completely different? Maybe you can just raise your hand if you had a very similar perception. Yes, I do think that most of us actually live in very diverse societies, and we do live all in a globalized world. So diversity has become the norm. And I do think that every person, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their religion, or their cultural background, they all should be respected and appreciated. And but the question today is, if we live in such diverse societies, does the Waldorf school, does the Waldorf institution actually also reflect this diversity? And that is the question of today's talk. So now I would like to show you the overview of my presentation. So first of all, I'd like to point out two aspects of diversity the socio-economic aspect and the cultural aspect. And I would like to do that in the form of a personal autobiographic anecdote before I then come to my second point, where I look at these two aspects, the socio-economic and the cultural diversity in Waldorf schools. And I divided the second part in 3 different sections. I will look at I called it then and now and not now and then. So I will look at these aspects at the first Waldorf school in 1919 and then see how it actually developed over the course of time. And then I will have a look at the intercultural Waldorf schools and then come to the question, how can actually all Steiner or Waldorf schools become more culturally diverse? And then I will move on to my third point, where I look at some other relevant aspects of diversity. And of course, there are many more aspects of diversity that are also quite relevant, but I chose 4 more which are quite relevant in the educational context, which are ability diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation, and geographic diversity. And then I will have my conclusion, where I would like to point out how important diversity-sensitive teaching is for a democratic society. Okay. Where do I come from and where do I belong? Well, as my name indicates, I'm not entirely German. Tatjana Pavlov-West. Tatjana is a Russian name. But my family is not Russian. And even Pavlov, if you add an A for the female gender, Pavlova, is also very common in Russia, but it also is very common in other Slavic countries. But my family actually comes from Croatia. And the other part of my surname, West, comes from my Australian husband. My father came to Germany in the 1960s as a so-called Gastarbeiter, as a guest worker. And he came to work, but then he met my mother, got married and had 2 children. And he was very keen on providing a good education for his 2 girls and worked very hard on construction sites and even very long hours. But it never occurred to him to send us to a private school. So I did not go to a Waldorf school. It also would not have been financially possible for our family. And at that time, my family did not really know much about Waldorf education. Only later on, when they heard about Waldorf education, they did not really understand the concept. They were just hearing these stereotypical ideas about Waldorf education. But they also had this feeling that it was a separate world where children with working class background and migration background actually did not have a place. So my father was not always welcomed in Germany. I remember actually an episode when I was little and I was walking back home with my father and one of his friends, and the 2 of them were speaking Croatian to each other. And then another man came and he looked at my father with a disgusted face and he told him, "Go home, you dirty foreigner." I was so shocked and I was scared and I was really puzzled, because I did not know what he meant. Did he know us? Did we know him? No. And what did he mean? Because we were actually on our way back home to our flat in Berlin-Neukölln. And my father was not dirty. He was a very clean man, had showers every day, and was always tidy and wore very clean clothes. So this was an experience that actually many guest workers shared. And so these guest workers, they were actually at that time not really welcomed in Germany. They were needed, but not welcomed. They were needed because after the Second World War, soon after the Second World War, it started like in the middle of the 1950s, Germany actually experienced a very an economic growth. And it was also called, the time was also called the economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. And but the problem was that they did not have enough workers in Germany. A lot of people died during the war, and then lots of people were also displaced. And the German people who were there, they actually wanted to take up some better jobs. So there was actually a shortage of labor in the construction sites or in the industries and in the factories. So Germany started to have these agreements with countries such as Turkey, Italy, Greece, and also former Yugoslavia, where they invited these guest workers to come and to work in these areas and to help Germany's prosperity. And they actually contributed very much, but nonetheless, they were not really welcomed, as I said. So this guest worker system actually reflects very much what the philosopher Jacques Derrida calls conditional hospitality, which means that the guests were invited to come, but they were only welcome to stay for a very limited time. And so they were expected to come to go back home after a certain time. And they were expected to follow the host's rules, but they never got the same rights as the hosts. So they could do the job and they had to follow rules, but they did not belong. And so that was the problem. Yeah? But soon they could actually see that lots of these guest workers stayed and settled down, and they changed actually the image of Germany. So because of that, at that time, integration was very one-sided. And Germany also believed that that Germany was still at this time a very homogeneous society, and that there was no linguistic or cultural diversity. But actually from the 1950s onwards, more and more migrants came and they changed this image of Germany very much. Yeah. So, and nowadays, actually, we can say we live in a very diverse and even a post-migrant society, a term that has been introduced by the Persian-German political scientist Naika Faratun. The post does not mean, the prefix does not mean that migration is over, but that that migration is actually a permanent reality. But in all this, the question is, so what's the role of Waldorf schools, and how did Waldorf school respond to these two aspects of diversity, to the socio-economic aspect and to the cultural aspect of diversity? So, and I would like to look at then and now, as I said, and then at intercultural Waldorf schools, and then I would like to raise the question how all Waldorf schools actually can become more culturally diverse. The first Waldorf school, as we all know, in 1919 was actually quite revolutionary, especially in terms of the socio-economic diversity. But you all know that Emmy Molt actually approached Rudolf Steiner and asked him to build a school for the children of his factory workers, for the Astoria cigarette factory, and this school was open then to the kids of the working class people, but also for children of the middle class families, also for the children of the anthroposophists. It was open to all of them, and it was also very progressive in many ways, because there was then all of a sudden co-education, which was new. Girls and boys were taught together, and it was also open to different religions, although at that time they were actually mostly coming from Catholic families and Protestant families, but they were taught together, and this was also something new at that time. But they were so open, and they were also open to different nations. But at that time, actually, Germany was not ethnically that diverse. There was very low immigration at that time, and there were space for displaced people, but in general, the society was not that diverse. That changed over time, and then, unfortunately, during the Nazi period, the Waldorf schools were closed down, and then they only opened after the Second World War. And then there was actually also, they spread actually, and there were also lots of international schools. But the Waldorf schools in Germany, they still did not have like this culture diversity. The society was, first of all, still very homogeneous, and then it changed when the first guest workers came and settled down in Germany. And also then, then other migrants came due to some wars, like in the 1990s, for example, in the Balkan Wars, people came and also settled down, and then people from the Middle East and from African countries due to wars. And so the population actually became more and more diverse. And the question is now, like, what was Waldorf's place in such a diverse society? Here's a quote by Albert Schmelzer and Martin Rawson, and they actually also point out that the Waldorf schools were not that diverse. It says, "The pupil body of Waldorf schools is relatively homogeneous and is by no means a representation, wait a second, I can't see, okay. A representative cross-section of society in which more than a third of the children and young people meanwhile have a migration background and or are German of color." Yeah. So it's really interesting, because if you look at the figures, we have like about 30% of the population in Germany with a migration background. And among the children, there are actually even 42% who have at least one parent without German citizenship. And if you look at the Waldorf schools, then only about 4%, there are only children with about 4% of the children have a migration background. So it's very low. It has changed. And of course, there's places like Hamburg or Berlin where there is a higher cultural diversity. But in general, it's actually very low. And so we can ask ourselves, what are possible reasons for that? Some of the reasons are probably the school fees, and also the location of the German Waldorf schools, because most of them are located in wealthier areas out of reach of the children with migration backgrounds. And then from the outset, it also seems that the schools are very Christian. And it seems then from outside that they're not so open to other religions, which is actually not the case. And then we have these admission interviews where you actually often also have to show your interest in anthroposophy. Of course, understandable, but a lot of families with migration background, they hear about Waldorf pedagogy, they're interested in it, but they might not be so connected to anthroposophy, and that also makes it more difficult. But another reason is probably also that a lot of families with migration backgrounds do not know much about Waldorf education, and they do want to send their children to schools where they get grades, and they think then they can have a better career. So there's not much knowledge, and they need to be better informed about the Waldorf educational system. Right. So there are lots of reasons, and when you look at this quote, it also says that there are actually also lots of people, lots of German of color, people of color in Germany, and but they're also not that much represented in German schools. And I have heard an interview with Ulrike Sievers, and who interviewed two teachers from Berlin, and one of them is Miriam Nünning, a black teacher, and she actually said that she thinks that lots of families of colors are actually interested in the Waldorf pedagogical concept, but they also hesitate to send their children there because of Steiner's racist remarks, and that the remarks are hardly thematized, and they also feel that a lot of the teaching material still contains racist comments, and that also some teachers still use racist language, often unintentionally and unconsciously, but it happens, and it is actually quite hurtful. And so that's also a reason why we have to change something. In 2003, the first intercultural Waldorf school was opened in Mannheim, and then followed by other intercultural schools in Berlin and in Dresden, and there were also lots of intercultural Waldorf kindergartens in Germany, in Hamburg too, in Berlin, and Mannheim, and there's also one school in Dortmund called Bunte Schule, Colorful School, where people actually really want to reinforce this cultural and socio-economic diversity. And so the major goals of these schools are really to have a real good mixture of children, 50% with migration backgrounds and 50% German. And what they do what they do more than the regular Waldorf schools is that there's a real appreciation of multilingualism and an appreciation of different cultures. Yeah, of course, like in regular Waldorf schools, we also appreciate different cultures, but you will see that they actually introduce subjects that reinforce this interest, and they're also very careful with the material they use and the language they use, and they try very much to avoid any kind of discrimination or exclusion, and they support like participation and co-creation. And so the question is that how do they actually do it? So what they do, or what they did and still do, and I think that's quite remarkable, it's a combination of the core values of Waldorf education, which is actually so useful, especially to address children with a migration background, and then combine these core values with some additional features. So the core values, as we all know, and they're good for all children, and when people come with a migration background, especially those who can't speak the language yet, it's actually great that there are no grades in lower and middle school, and that they can learn without fear and without threat of early selection, and that there's a strong emphasis on artistic and practical craft subjects, and also this phenomenological style of teaching that has been also mentioned in the last lecture by Rode and Sommer, that this is actually something that motivates the intrinsic learning. And another thing that actually is quite useful is the trust that can be built because of the close relationship between the class teacher and this long-term relationship between the class teachers and the pupils. So yes, what is new? Not only is there this mixture of 50% children with migration background and German children, but the schools actually also are located in areas with a higher migration population. And they also have different architecture, and some even have like factories for their schools, so they're accessible actually to the people from the neighborhood, and they also go and explain and inform people about Waldorf pedagogy. And what is also quite interesting, that they do have some additional subjects, such as German as immersion. So that's a special language support in German for the kids. And then they also have like a subject which I find very interesting, the language of encounter. And there's like no set curriculum for the subject, but they do have different language groups for Serbian, Croatian, Polish, for example, or Turkish and Spanish. And some schools may have other languages. And then the children, all children, also the German children, they can actually all choose which language group they're going to join. And for those children who actually speak those languages, it's actually shows an appreciation of where they come from and what language they speak. So, but it's not like a real language class, because they learn the language again in form of verses, of like stories and role plays. So it's like a different experience of the language and of the culture diversity that is also like then introduced. And the culture diversity also comes into this into the lessons that have been introduced by Andrea Selzer-Blonsky. I find that very interesting. It's called Kulturunterricht, cultural lessons. And she actually says that they introduced in third grade Judaism as a topic, so that the children can learn about the festivities and about the beauty of the religion. And then in class 4 they have Christianity, and then in class 5 they do Islam, where they also learn about the festivities and they eat different food and all this. So I think this is actually really, really helpful, and we can actually take the intercultural schools as a good example, and maybe do even more in the regular schools. Okay, so now the question is, how can our Waldorf schools actually become more culturally diverse? And as I said, I think we could take the intercultural school as a very good example, and maybe really make very clear that we are against any forms of racism and discrimination. And we do have these clear statements actually in form of the Stuttgarter Declaration on the home pages, which actually says that we distance ourselves from these racist remarks by Steiner, and that we are against any form of discrimination. But what I do think actually is that we should also be very careful in choosing teaching material. And I think it was Sven Saar who talked about traditions, and maybe we should also question some traditions that we have, and in that respect also to see if these traditions are still valid, or do these traditions actually include something that could also offend some people. I don't know, like the in the Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands, for example, where there's blackfacing, but it's a tradition for Christmas, and but we could question if this tradition should be actually be still intact if it's actually quite racist. So it's very important to choose age-appropriate teaching material that is alert to the danger of racism. And we should also try to avoid generalizations and discriminations of any kind, and include other cultures and also languages and perspectives, and point out what cultures actually also have in common. I think that's very important, because we are very much focused always on the differences, and it looks as if we still regard cultures as very homogeneous entities, but we should also realize that cultures overlap, and that often also something new comes out, something emergent, and that is something that Martin Rawson mentioned in his talk. The second point I think is extremely relevant, and that is especially relevant for teacher training, because we have to offer, and that's also happening. I've seen that there's a workshop in Mannheim on diversity coming up in February. But we should actually make sure that we always invite experts from outside who can do workshops on different aspects of diversity, and this should not just happen once, but it should be on a regular basis. And I do think actually it should become compulsory, because the teachers are very insecure in many respects, and they should be trained first of all to feel more secure to deal actually with the cultural diversity, and also how to confront discrimination when it comes up. For this last point, I think this is extremely important, as I said, to also see what different cultures have in common. And I wanted to show you a really nice children's book, Heads of Faith. Can you see it? Can you? The title too. It's from 2017, which actually shows all these different head coverings from different religions. And these head coverings are worn to show their love for God. So I want to show you like two pictures in there, 2 pages. Here, for example, is a boy with a kippah, which many Jewish boys and men wear. And unfortunately, we don't actually see lots of Jewish people wearing the kippah in Germany, understandably. And I also heard people saying that they're scared. They wouldn't show, and they wouldn't actually also tell people that they're Jewish because of anti-Semitism, especially in Germany. But you would see something like this in France or in New York. And it's good that the children actually know about these head coverings. And here is one that is worn by many African Christian and Muslim women in many African countries. It's a head wrap, and here we have a woman with a chuni, a sick woman, and then I think it's good also to learn about the topi, which is the small hat that lots of South Asian Muslim men wear. I think it's important to actually explain to the children that there's a huge difference, between wearing a baseball hat in school that you should take off, of course, but that they also understand if there are people in the class who wear a topi or a chuni or a kippah, that it is actually a religious sign, and that there is a difference, and that we should respect it, and that different religions have these head coverings. Another beautiful book that I'd like to share with you, it's a book that my own children got from their grandparents from Australia. It's called The Golden Rule. Very beautiful. Don't know if anyone knows that one. It's actually a grandfather who goes for a walk with his grandson, and then he sees some writing on the wall, which says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." And so that's very relevant, that you always should treat other people the way you would like to be treated. And then he takes the boy through to different religions who actually all have the same in their belief. And so that is the golden rule, something that they all actually have in common and that we should point out more strongly in our teaching. And in high school, there's another quote by Martin Rawson and Albert Schmelzer, and they also say the major religious currents, the religiosity of indigenous peoples, Chinese religiosity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, should all be taught not only to create a basis of understanding for cultures that have been shaped by these ideas, but also to sensitize pupils and show how intertwined and indeed unbounded those religions and cultures are. Yeah? So a call to more diversity, culture diversity, also by showing them different religions. And I think this is something that is extremely important, especially in times like these. All right, so now I'm going to move to the next part of my presentation, where I want to talk about some other relevant aspects of diversity. The first one, ability diversity, and gender diversity, sexual orientation, and geographic diversity. Let's start with ability diversity, which includes differences in students' physical, mental, and learning abilities. And this is actually a very strong point of Waldorf education, because Waldorf education actually responds to this aspect of diversity with its educational approach, this individualized learning, and with all these beautiful artistic and practical and experimental methods, drawing, music, crafts, movement, eurythmy, and all these things actually allow the children with different physical, mental, or learning abilities to participate and to excel in their own ways and pace. And a lot of things are done here, and there are also schools for special needs. And in the teachers' training, you can see there are lots of courses offered, which are called here in Germany inclusion, which actually refers basically to how to help and support children with disabilities. And I do know that in the English-speaking world, inclusion actually also refers to other aspects of diversity. So this is a very strong point, but it's like a teaching approach that is actually good for all the children, where they can actually develop and learn in their own pace and grow. Let's come to the next aspect, that's gender diversity. And the question is, how does Waldorf education respond to gender diversity? The first Waldorf school in 1919 was actually for boys and girls, and the great thing was also that they had to attend all the different lessons, no matter whether it was woodwork, and they still do, of course, or metalwork, or sewing, or stitching. So boys and girls, they really have to do all these subjects together. So that's very revolutionary. So, but it was still very much based on this binary gender role model, and which is also very visible, like in the teaching material and the text that we choose. Modern Steiner schools increasingly recognize gender diversity, But I also think that mere statements are not enough. So it's one thing to have all these statements on our home pages, but I think what we need to do is actually to live the diversity in our classrooms, and which means that we have to respect the students' gender identity and their gender expression, and we have to be more inclusive. We have to respect the pronouns, and we should also have an inclusive address to the class. So instead of saying good morning boys and girls, we should address the whole class. Good morning class 4 or whatever. Toilets, another thing. I mean, there's not just the female gender and the male gender, but we also have diverse gender, where it's actually not explicitly female or male. And there are about 7% in the German society who have this intersex, but you actually don't really know about that. So it would be actually also good to have toilets, not just for girls and boys, but also diverse toilets, unisex toilets additionally. And I think it would be also good then to talk about school trips, what you could do, where you could talk about these things with the class, with the parents, and to actually decide, where should these children actually sleep, in which rooms, and where, and what can we do to make them feel more comfortable and more seen. And again, I think it's very important to choose stories and images where all gender identities are represented, and also make sure that you don't have any stereotypical expectations, by saying, oh, I need 2 strong boys to carry this table for me. Yeah, so just ask, who could please help me carrying the table? So there's a lot of things that we can actually pay attention to, especially and also in terms of language. I mean, we had in the past, not this time, Sven Saar talked about tradition, but in the past I've seen a couple of his presentations who also dealt with a whole gender issue, and he published this wonderful book about the art of relationships with some other people. So let's move on to sexual orientation. The same here. How does Waldorf education respond to it? And just remember things that I forgot to tell you for sexual orientation, but also for the gender diversity. I wanted to add something, because I've got a student now who's writing her bachelor thesis, and she wants to write it about gender diversity, and she said that during her school time, and also other students mentioned that they were always texts who were actually male, where there were male protagonists, and she really longs for more female protagonists. So and also when we do biography work, I think it's really important that we present different people, people of color, and also famous women who achieved something. So to just really present this diversity and make it very normal. So in terms of sexual orientation, the traditional Steiner pedagogy had this very binary system, very heteronormative, and also the stories don't actually really present any homosexual or other kind of relationships, and I think there we do have to include this too, and some progressive Steiner schools also include already this respect for LGBTQIA+ identities. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with these letters. Just briefly going to mention it again. L stands for lesbian, and then gay, and then bisexual, transgender, queer, which is an umbrella term for all these things, and then intersexual, yeah, neither, if someone is neither a woman or a man and have both sexual, a mixture of these sexual organs and hormones, and then asexual, where someone has actually no sexual desires or feelings. Plus stands for many more gender identifications and other identities. Here too, we need an inclusive language, and we also should have support networks. We should have people in schools and at universities where students and pupils actually can go to, and where they can get information and help, and where they can openly speak if there's something discriminating that they experienced. And we should create an awareness, and that can only happen if really all the people are trained, first of all, by experts coming to the schools and coming to the universities. With with all these aspects of diversity, we really need to make all different people visible in the teaching material, and so even for the very small kids, we should have like bookshelves where you can find families, homosexual families to raising kids, because you don't actually have to thematize something like this in the very low classes. But if you have actually books and images that represent different models of families, then it just becomes natural. And later on, of course, you can thematize these things. You can look at gender stereotypes. You can also choose books, that actually have homosexual stories in them. You could also discuss, like later on, I'm an English teacher, so in class 11, when lots of people teach Shakespeare, and if you teach Romeo and Juliet, for example, you could try and transform it into a play where the two of them could not be together because the parents do not allow them to be homosexual. Yeah, so there are so many possibilities, and Sven Saar once also suggested to change fairy tales. And to just have like a Rapunzel and to be a man and to be in a homosexual relationship, to actually just change some things which would not actually change any core aspects that are so important in these stories. Yeah. Right. Let's come to the last point in this part. The geographic diversity. This includes differences in students' local and regional identity, and it includes their experiences based on where they live, where they learn, and where they play. How does Waldorf education respond to this? Well, it first of all always includes local and regional history and nature history, connecting students first of all to their own environment, but at the same time, of course, it also encourages, Waldorf pedagogy also encourages global awareness and intercultural understanding, and is trying to bridge the local and the broader context. What's necessary is to, especially in the international context, we have so many schools worldwide, to adapt the teaching material according to the respective culture. Yeah, so there are apparently, maybe there are even more now, a couple of years later, there are 1,270 Steiner Waldorf schools in 80 countries across the world. I find that really impressive, and you can see that since the 1990s and 2000s, and then again in the 2020, with the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a widespread push towards anti-racist teaching and also an inclusion of more world literature. I mean, world literature plays a major role in Waldorf pedagogy, but to really bring in more perspectives, different perspectives on history. And a lot is already done in Waldorf education. A couple of years ago, Michael Zech started to look at the cultural epochs and to realize that it was actually a very Eurocentric view that we had on history, and that this needs to be changed, and that we can't have these hierarchies of cultures, that this is actually quite racist, and that we have to bring in other perspectives on history. Doesn't mean that we have to delete everything, but we just have to add some other perspectives to make a discussion possible. But these schools also abroad, they have a much clearer inclusion policies. It's interesting that when I check the home pages of different Waldorf schools, I noticed that the English-speaking schools actually very often have a statement about diversity, inclusion, and diversity, inclusion, and equity, and also belonging. Many more than the German schools, so I do think that we have to do more in this area to also locally, but also internationally. A nice example, because I mean, you can see that there's so many countries who are attracted by Waldorf pedagogy, who think that this is a good concept for their children. And I totally agree, because they want something different for their children. They want them to grow and develop and flourish, like in a different way, without stress and without too much pressure, and enjoy this holistic education. But we can't just impose our contents, our curriculum onto other countries. It has to be adapted locally. And this is also something that is pointed out by Neil Boland from New Zealand, who actually says here in this quote what they do in their classes, and how they actually adapt the Waldorf contents according to the local situation. My students wanted their viewpoint to be present in all subjects, so history would also be told and viewed through Maori eyes. Art would have a Maori perspective. Science would be approached holistically, easy in a Steiner school. The story of the land would be taught thoroughly and with reverence. Indigenous views work perfectly hand in hand with place-based pedagogy. The curriculum would be balanced and not tilted to favor the dominant or dominator worldview. Yeah? So very important, really, and that was there were actually a lot of critics who said that it's the Waldorf curriculum is very Eurocentric, but you can see that it's people realize that, and they move away from the Eurocentric viewpoint, and it's important to include more perspectives and more voices. Right, so let's come to my conclusion, and Sven, I saw you also that you used this quote by Adrian Rich, which I love, and I think it's also very appropriate for my presentation. It says, "When those who have the power to name and to socially construct reality choose not to see or hear you, when someone with the authority of a teacher describes the world and you are not in it, there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked in the mirror and saw nothing." Yeah, I think it's really important, especially for the health of the children, to make everyone seen, to make them be seen and be heard. And if that's done, then we actually can thrive in a democratic society, because democracy thrives when all voices are heard. And it's also extremely relevant to include all these different perspectives, because it fosters critical thinking, empathy, and tolerance, which are all essential democratic values. And if we manage to recognize and to value all different aspects of diversity, then we can try and prevent marginalization, and to offer equal opportunities to all of them, and to make them be able to participate in our society. And yes, and it is important to address all these structural inequalities that exist in our societies, and also to address discrimination and power relations in education, because that can help students also to develop their own judgment. So, and in the end, I've got one last quote. In times when global powers dare to abolish diversity, it is all the more important to use the wealth and beauty that a diverse society brings us as an opportunity, and to make it visible. That's a quote by one of the founding members of the International Intercultural School in Mannheim, Susanne Piwecki. And I do think that this is very important, especially at the moment where some societies actually try to abolish diversity. Well, thank you very much for your attention. And now I really would love to hear about your own experience. How diverse are your educational institutions, and which aspects of diversity are addressed, and how, and what is still missing? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tatjana. So the stage is open. Who is going to start with a question or comment? There has been something in the chat I saw already by Ines. She's not very much happy with this changing of Romeo and Juliet. Maybe, Ines, you want to express your thoughts yourself?
Yeah. Say something?
Have you read it?
Yes, I have read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't read the Shakespeare's texts. I think they're very, very important. But I think especially Romeo and Juliet is so popular because it can be referred to different contexts. I mean, there is a story, for example, not just like two gay people, but there's a story about a Bosnian and so a Muslim and a Catholic Croatian, and they were also not allowed to be together. So, and the story is also based on Romeo and Juliet. So the main thing is, why can't these two young people be together? And if you want to, you can read Shakespeare first of all, and then you can start thinking of how could you also transform it in a different way. But of course, you don't have to do that. I think it's very important that we always have to, feel comfortable with what we teach. And if that is not something for you, I can understand that, and I respect that. And you definitely don't have to do that. So don't worry about that.
Is there something to add from your side, Ines? You can write it if you can't go into the microphone. So maybe you can do it, and maybe Sven first.
Well, first of all, Tatjana, thank you so much for your excellent lecture. I think you covered so many important areas, and it's a real appeal to humanity and humaneness that we hear all too rarely nowadays. I thought Inesh's response is, of course, one that comes very often, is of the type that comes quite often. Oh, you can't do that because we would lose things. And I think it doesn't have to be either or. I think these suggestions to alter things, to try things in a different way, that's a learning opportunity for us. And we may well find that once we've tried it, that you can't change Romeo and Juliet and you would lose the essence. But we will never know unless we do try. And I get very excited about the opportunity to test things like the Grimm's fairy tales and so on for their stability, for their longevity. So thank you very much for raising the possibility to talk about this.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sven, for your comment. I'm very grateful. And as I said, I mean, everyone has to be happy with what they teach and how they teach it. If you don't feel comfortable changing something, then don't do it. But there are opportunities, and I also think that maybe sometimes we have to try things out, which does not mean that we should not teach Shakespeare and learn about Shakespearean text. And we can still do that and then still experiment, and to approach a different facet.
Ulrike?
Thank you very much, Tatjana. I think the point you made, the teacher has to feel comfortable, is very important. On the other hand, we have 25, 36 students in the class, and they have to feel comfortable as well. So I think this is one of the wicked problems. We have so many in the Waldorf that we have to find a sort of compromise, right? The teacher has to feel comfortable, but the students need to feel seen. And I find the quote you said, if you look into the mirror and you don't see anything, this is very disturbing. So if we have the pupils who read text and don't see themselves, don't find themselves, that must also be disturbing in their development. So I think there's a lot about trying out and being brave enough to open perspectives, and maybe ask another teacher to come in who feels more comfortable with this sort of thing. Would also be a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much for this contribution. I think yes, and I think it's also that you probably know your class, yeah. So you know if you can actually try out something like this or not, or you could also have like different groups working on different setups. Then Romeo and Juliet, they can't be together because of different religions. And then maybe a small group can play a scene where they can't be together because it's a gay couple and the parents do not allow that, so we can put it actually in different contexts and try something out, and then they can choose into, in which group they'd like to work. And then it's not like imposing something where they would feel uncomfortable, because that is, of course, very important. They do feel uncomfortable. But offering maybe more possibilities would be something where they feel comfortable with. Thank you.
I saw a hand sign from Dorothy, and after that, maybe Tordis.
I agree with being comfortable, but I would say also, in addition, it's interesting that you as a teacher see your children and open possibilities to question what you did. I think if you talk about Romeo and Juliet, it has not been to change, but you have to be open to discuss, and the questions will come. If you see your children, then they will ask these questions you were talking about, and then you come in a discussion. This can be done with this, I would say, in this moment, old-fashioned stuff, and you can take new ones. But the most important is that they really come into a talk. So it's not depending on the text, I would say. It's depending on the openness of the teacher or the children, that they just feel, oh, I can ask something and say, oh, I see different, or something like this. So it's just this is important, I would say, next to the story I'm talking about. So if they feel this is just now, then they would not say anything. You know what I mean?
Yes. You're absolutely right. We need to be, able to create a safe space for children, so that they can actually exchange their ideas, have a conversation, and also express their fears or their comments, to make it actually possible to hear different voices.
And they will ask different questions nowadays than 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
So I would say, yeah. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dorothy. Tordis and then Annika.
Hello. Well, the thing that I haven't heard being talked about is teachers being part of the LGBTQ community in Waldorf. I don't know how acknowledged people are who are teachers and who are diverse. I work in a state school, and there were some gay teachers in the school, and they just founded a rainbow club also for students. And after several years now, the rainbow people at the school are just part of the whole community. Nobody sort of is puzzled because it's just a normal thing at the school now, because it's been introduced, because there were people who took over and made it normal for people to be all sorts of things at the school.
Yeah, that's great. That's really nice to hear, and I think, I mean, that is something that I actually neglected. I also wanted to talk about diversity in the staff, because we have the staff, we have the teachers and the lecturers, and how do they represent diversity? And I think it's good if you signal, that you can be anything you like and you're going to be appreciated the way you are. It's good. And if there are also teachers who express, their identity, whether it's in terms of homosexuality or whatever, it gives them really a sign that everything is fine. Yeah, you can be who you are. You don't have to hide. Thank you.
Annika?
Yes, thank you for your lecture. It was very wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's absolutely a question of our time to think about diversity. And I'm really thankful to have some colleagues who are in the LGBTQAI plus community, and they are role models for our children, because I think many of our children don't know what their life will be when they are grown-ups, and they need to have different role models in all type of whatever is possible. And I think it's so important, and I absolutely like the idea of a rainbow club. I really like it, and I will have to keep this in mind. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really am so keen on hearing more about, how your institutions actually deal with diversity. But I mean, if there are more questions, but otherwise I really would like to hear about your own experiences, like the Rainbow Club,
Ulrike, is it still valid, your hand sign?
Well, now it's valid again, because now I can answer to Tatjana's question.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that. My school is in the middle of Hamburg, Sternschanze, and it is absolutely normal. In every class, there are gay couples among the parents, and we have gay teachers, and it's very open, and it's no problem at all. But I think that is not directly related to Waldorf or not Waldorf. My hypothesis would be this is because we're in the middle of Hamburg. It would be interesting to hear from other schools how you deal with that, if anybody has an idea whether there's a relation with Waldorf or whether it's more a geographical question.
I have a question from my side. For me, listening to your lecture, Tatjana, it's a bit personally some kind of a paradigm shift for me. For a long time or till now, my relationship to Waldorf is that I always strongly believed it's some kind of on the peak of humanity. So it's the highest level of humanity in pedagogy I can imagine. That is always my connection to Waldorf. When I listen to what you say, I think, oh, maybe this is not true anymore, or are we a bit behind of what's going on in the world, or aren't we not too much traditional, so to speak, and on many aspects really don't to fulfill that level of diversity, which is and being sensitive about it, as it has been the measurement or scale of our time. Can you see what I say? So maybe it's too self-critical towards Waldorf, as Ulrike said. Maybe we are much further than I would have thought. But when I listen to what you say, we have a strong tradition and we love that tradition. And of course, this tradition is nothing at all diverse, so to speak, or doesn't reflect on it much, because it's a really new tendency of our ethical consciousness to really think in these directions. And yeah, this is something. Is Waldorf still on? Does it really have that impact in humanity? We can say maybe yes, it has a potential very much, because we have that potential of